Good morning. You're listening to Central Wisconsin's 24-hour information station, AM 1320 WFHR. It's time now for the Morning Magazine, brought to you by Comfort Air Heating, Cooling, Plumbing. Now, with the Morning Magazine, here's Carl Hilke.
Thank you, Jerry, and good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's show on AM 1320 and streaming live at WFHR.com. We also welcome our buddy Jesse from Wisconsin Rapids Community Media, and the reason they're here is it's our monthly visit with Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink, and we'll be taking your phone calls later on in this program at 715-424-2600. But with that, we welcome the Mayor of Wisconsin Rapids, Zach Vruwink. Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning, Carl, and good morning to our listeners.
Okay, why don't we just get the topic in this neighborhood that off the table right off the bat. And it's something Rick Bacoca and I talked about the last time he was here with his Town of Rome report, because he wanted to address it too. And that's IDAPRO and the odor problem. And there's been stories and stories. And sometimes, I'm going to be honest with you, sir, there's days when this could almost make me gag. And Rick and I talked. I guess you and Rick took a tour with IDAPRO and have been meeting with them. Give us a status update.
Well, the situation with IDAPRO has been a challenging one because they have been in good faith making improvements to their exhaust system, which is giving most of the smell. There's also been a concern related to particulate matter that's made it through their scrubbing system and into the air and into the neighboring property of IDAPRO. But at the same time, we've also been concerned about the time it's taken them, and have they been working as expeditiously as they should and as they've said they will? And they've had a tremendous amount of turnover there. They do have a plant manager that's been there for a while now. I would say he's kind of a veteran of the industry and of processing and manufacturing. So I do give him a bit of my good faith that he's going to, make do on their promises. But we have issued a number of citations. In fact, we just issued citations earlier this week because of some complaints related to the strong odor and unfortunately impacting people's health, as you said. So we've taken the complaints very seriously. We did meet with the leadership of the company last week here in Rapids that came in from Idaho and their other facilities, to find out really what's to establish a normal. What is a normal operation or a day going to look like? The challenge is they receive a diverse amount of product, and that product comes from potato processors in the area, and sometimes that potato waste or material is very pungent, and it's decomposing, and it's giving off a very strong odor, and unfortunately that's what gives that odorous smell in the air. I mean, there's kind of a regular potato smell, but it's the really strong stuff that I think really impacts the neighbors and impacts the whole city at times when you've got the right conditions with the airflow and that sort of thing. So we understand there are two improvements that they're going to be making that we believe and trust that will make a positive impact on the situation. One is the extension of a stack. They have another 20 feet they can extend the stack on the property, which we believe will then allow that material to get up further. Now, if you get a certain wind, that may bring it back, and change the situation. Then there's the other piece that some of that real pungent material had fallen off the vehicles or had been lost in transfer from their storage facility into the dehydration facility, and that just fermented in the ground. And so they're going to be putting in a lot more concrete to enable them to clean a lot more of the transfer area so that they don't have that situation where there's runoff and it's creating a localized smell around the plant. Do I ever think that they will operate in this community without a smell? I have a tough time believing they will, and it's unfortunate because if it doesn't impact health, safety, and welfare, it doesn't. They're allowed to operate. But if there are situations where we're receiving complaints, it's very pungent. Absolutely, will we meet with them and cite them if necessary.
Okay. Now, when do they plan on doing these improvements to the stack and the concrete and everything else?
Well, they had to get board approval from their board of directors, so that happens in the next couple of weeks. They believe that they'll have the engineering and then the installation done by the year's end. So, I would say within the next 2 months.
Okay. What is that? The fact that you have a business like that in this industrial park, did it meet code, or is a business that has an odor
Right.
allowed in the West Side Industrial Park.
There are some covenants that follow the industrial park in terms of what businesses are allowed and the type of material and the kind of the impact they can have on neighboring parcels, and that's where we've cited them off of. It's really to the West Side Industrial Park, as well as the codes that are in our municipal code that talk about noxious odors and that sort of thing.
Okay, so, and they've talked about I guess some of the product they get from
Primarily McCain's.
McCain's, yeah, and that would be landfilled
Right.
if they weren't recycling it for pet food.
Right.
And they said they could change. Rick told me on the show that they could change the type of waste that they get, or the type of potato that they use. That could also help with that.
Yeah, they haven't been able to get discretion from McCain's and others. The waste material is the waste material, and that's it. So, yeah, we're unsure if they're able to exercise any discretion with their contracts. It didn't sound like it, but they need to continue to treat. They've got options with a company called Nalco, which does a lot of chemical treatment and neutralizing of air, and so they've been installing systems that keep the smell very localized to a storage building, for example, and not outside in the yard, and then obviously in the neighborhood or across the city.
Okay, well, how much time are you giving them for these improvements?
We don't have an understanding. We had a period of time for that scrubbing unit, which is that large scrubber that makes actually a fair amount of noise where the air travels through, and there's some neutralizer that gets sprayed on the air. And we had that, and they met the schedule. There was some delays in just getting it up and running, but they had it installed. So we haven't given them a timetable on these other improvements because we had a common understanding that they'll be done by the end of the year.
Okay, I guess. What is your advice then to the residents of the city, or to keep filing complaints?
Well, if it impacts their daily lives, they should be filing a complaint with the city inspector, and the city inspector is the person that goes over and checks on it. And if there's they're supposed to be, the other piece we have an understanding on is they're supposed to make us fully aware if there's a hiccup or a disruption in their normal operations, because we will cite them if they know about it and they didn't tell us.
Okay. Has this shown a deficiency in in either plant siting or in the way and I guess in the anticipation of knowing, did we realize what this thing could do when it was okayed for?
Well, what's interesting is they bought the facility before we knew about it, and then they proceeded with their installation of equipment, and we had discussions with them. So I think in hindsight, did I know that this was going to be as much of a disruptor as they have been? No. Did they indicate that they would emit this type of smell and particulate in some cases? No. So it's been a classic, hindsight is 2020, and would we have cited them here and gone through all the rigmarole and time that I've spent talking to people about complaints to, there's this law firm that's now soliciting, legal action against the company from Milwaukee. No, I would have probably found a play or suggested they consider an outside of the, an urban setting like the city is.
Okay, so what lesson do we learn from that in terms of the processes that we use? I
think it's better screening, and I think, we don't have any control over the real estate transactions that occur in the city, of course. The city, is a passive bystander if somebody wants to buy a piece of property. But ultimately, our zoning code has to be tight enough to allow or disallow certain types of activities in certain areas. Now, some of our listeners might be saying, city shouldn't be involved in that. But if we're impacting the lives of mid-school students, for example, that are having to go home sick, or faculty are going home sick, that's an issue. And, we can't allow them just to be allowing them to operate in the city without any recourse.
Yeah, this is a classic case of being pro-business and wanting business development and public safety and nuisances.
Right. And I believe they want to be a good corporate citizen because they've invested over a number of millions of dollars at that plant, and they're not done, and they want to bring other vegetable material here, but it's finding what is the new norm and how are they going to operate here without causing major disruption to people's health, safety, and welfare.
Okay, we'll leave it at that, I guess, for further updates.
Yes, to be continued, I'm sure.
Yesterday afternoon, got the release from your office of the release of the 2018 executive budget, which now goes to the Common Council and the Finance Committee and various committees and the like. Give us your budget message, as it were, Your Honor.
Sure. Well, in short, most of the departmental requests remain flat, and that comes at the directive of operating under tight state-imposed revenue limits, that we don't have the ability to raise our tax levy and therefore raise taxes. So in an effort to keep property taxes flat in the city and around the state, we have to keep our budgets flat. So I'm proud that we were able to do that and also maintain our service levels. There haven't been any proposals to reductions in service levels in this budget. So for residents that are concerned about having, maybe paying the same or paying more but receiving less, that's not the case in the 2018 budget proposal. However, there are a number of borrowing pieces to the budget for bonding, which generally includes public works construction. We generally borrow $1 million a year for street reconstruction and work. But this budget actually completes the city's commitment to the Aquatic Center development. So $2.5 million was budgeted in the 2017 budget, and then the other $2.5 balance will be budgeted in the 2018 budget. So that'll be reflected on the 2019 taxes. But there is an uptick in borrowing associated with this budget, primarily because we can't do it through regular property tax revenues. We have to do it through borrowing.
Okay. So some of the highlights on your priorities.
Well, obviously the Aquatic Center, the City Council made that commitment, and we followed suit with my budget proposal. The airport was one that we've talked about a lot on our show, and that's I think there's a fair question amongst local taxpayers to say, well, what are we contributing to the operations at the airport? As the Airport Commission, we all agreed that we didn't want to raise our ask to the taxpayers locally, and it's offset in large part because of all of the growth in traffic we had there this year. So there was a tremendous amount of revenues associated with that traffic that'll help us pay for the local cost share of planned improvements. So the reconstruction of the crosswind runway, which is the secondary runway at the facility, the local match will be made up of reserves, but also growth in revenues from fuel sales out at the airport. So local taxpayers in the 4 owner municipalities are not paying any more than they have in the past for the airport. Centralia Center, that's been 10 years since the city acquired that facility and converted it in from the Walmart into Centralia. And we've heard a lot of comments from users of Centralia that the parking lot is not safe and there might be a better design. And so we did pursue a better design to improve traffic flow, get handicap parking closer to the door, and improve some pedestrian access. So we did fully fund the reconstruction of a parking lot at Centralia Center, which will include a kind of a change in the entrance. We also are still completing and working through the East Riverbank stabilization and the trail that's proposed for the area bounded by the Riverview Expressway up to Veterans Park. And so we will begin construction on that in 2018. And we've now received a second grant of close to $600,000, which brings our total grants just over $1.2 million. And so we're proposing that we borrow for our half of that second project, so it'll be a phase 2 that will be borrowed. So there's about $500-some thousand budgeted in the city budget to finish the trail and the other improvements along the East River Bank. And then the kind of the bigger item I think that's worth noting in this budget that I want our listeners to know about is we've heard a lot from people related to the blocked crossings.
Yes.
And the frequency of them. And I'm sure you get calls on the radio. City Hall gets a tremendous amount of calls. And not to say that we can solve the situation, but we need to really get to the root cause of what's causing the blockages. Is it just the size of the rail yard? Is it the demands of just on the railroad industry? But it disrupt. I think if we quantify the economic disruption and the impact, it's substantial, and it's a negative disruption, right? It impacts the livelihoods of people getting to and from work, businesses that are conducting business and need to travel across the tracks but are held up sometimes 45 minutes or longer. So our hope is that we'll be able to work perhaps in partnership with the railroad to analyze the situation. But I did ask the City Council to fund an analysis of the railroad crossing situation, predominantly at the High Street, West Grand, and Chase Street street crossings, because not only is it disruptive to our local community, it also carries a state highway on it, and so there's also disruption to those that are traveling through the area.
What caused? I'll give you an example, sir. Yesterday morning, I get here for our listeners. I get to the office by about 5 o'clock every morning because doing the early thing. And yesterday, driving in, turned on Chase, train there. Not moving at all. It's got West Grand Block. Like you got people getting ready. You're starting. You'd be surprised the amount of traffic of people going to work that early in the morning.
Yeah, sure.
And people start turning around. I ended up going back around and through Bowl Street and back onto 17th, and so I could get here close enough to my normal time. And that's the kind of stuff that can lead to accidents, obviously, during a real busy period, and frustrations, et cetera. Right. What's the reason? Why does it have to stop?
Right. And that's what we hope to unearth through an analysis. And we don't know, it's too early to know if we have to hire a consultant to do that or if we can just, allocate staff time to have some fact-finding and things. But it's past time that we look at this situation. Frankly, when they built the expressway, they should have addressed it.
Oh, amen. I was one of the people when they built the express. I said, what are you doing with the railroad tracks?
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense.
But here we are, 40 years almost to the year later, and we're dealing with the situation. I think if you quantify the economic impact over that period of time, it's pretty dramatic. So we hope that, we can certainly tell our listeners that we've heard the complaints loud and clear. I don't know if we're going to be able to solve a situation, but I believe that we can analyze it, and it's good city planning for us to have a discussion about it.
What do they say is the issue from the
railroad? It's normal operations for them. Other than there was a blockage, I think about an hour, maybe a month or so ago, and we reached out to them, and then they had an operational disruption, and I think they cruise timed out. And if anyone has ever traveled on airlines or anything else, when you time out, or truck drivers, that's it. You've got to bring in another crew to run the operation, and they were blocking the crossings when they timed out.
Oh my Lord!
So it was horrible, and so we need to figure out and get to the bottom of those others, because I know it impacts. I get calls from any number of people that are waiting for their clients to show up, and they're late for appointments, and I mean it's not a good thing. And
what about if an emergency?
Well, yeah, our crews have been able to map out getting around on Bonau and others or F, but I think it's not a good solution ultimately. So we hope that we can further explore the block crossing situation further and get some answers on alternatives that maybe we could either build, or it may not be a build situation. It may be we just may have a frank conversation with the railroad around times a day that we can maybe come to agreement that it's appropriate for them to block crossing.
Yeah, that's the other thing. I mean, we even have that issue here in the industrial park.
Yeah.
There's some times where they're blocked, and it's like, are you kidding me? This is a busy time of the day. What are you thinking?
Right.
And
it's at the worst times.
Yeah, I mean, and there are times when there's hardly anybody here in the middle of the night. That would be a good time to go do that kind of stuff. Yeah. But, yeah, I mean, it does get frustrating for folks. And it's like, come on, can we work out some kind of an amicable solution to this problem? But Wisconsin Rapids isn't the only one.
Correct.
People listening to us in Junction City know what.
Well, and Stevens Point just completed on Hoover, which is near the Stevens Point Country Club and some of their industrial park in Stevens Point, an overpass. They did what they call a grade separation.
Okay.
Either do an underpass or you do an overpass, and they analyzed it. And I looked at the report. I mean, if we do any build at the expressway, for example, it's going to be tens of millions of dollars. But we need to know what that cost is and what those alternatives look like, and the community can say, well, it's worth that or it's not, and but we need to get to the bottom of what are those alternatives. It's a large intersection, speaking of just West Grand and the expressway, but maybe we can do an alternative, a chase or something, and accomplish a change there.
Back when the coal train first began, there was a process, and this radio station was involved with it, where everybody, law enforcement, got notified that the coal train was coming. They even upgraded the crossings so it could go by faster. But there was we would get an alert. Everybody was given an alert so that you knew, and we could broadcast, hey, the coal train's coming through at 12:40 today. Or so. Maybe we got to go back to something like that, where give us a heads up when you got a big train that's going to be going through town.
That's an interesting point, and I'm not sure, we haven't had that discussion with them, but we certainly can.
Okay, I mean, I'm old enough to remember these things.
I'll admit, I was not aware of that.
Okay, well, I just gave you some information because I remember taking those phone calls, writing it down.
You could do an advisory, I suppose.
Yeah. And say, hey, Coltrane scheduled to go through, heading toward Wausau area at 12:40 this afternoon. Expected to take about this many minutes to get through.
Sure.
Okay, and people could plan accordingly. So we'll have that. How are the various projects that are going on in the city and will be going on in the city affecting your budget, this budget, and also future budgets?
In terms of
spending by the city.
Sure. Well, given the sheer volume of borrowing, there will be, that impacts the debt capacity or the debt load that the city does carry. We are working on a debt projection to project out, because every year we've borrowed, right? So we've got things like the Centralia Center. There's outstanding debt on the Centralia Center. Eventually, those things will fall off, right? So your tax rate will drop down. So we're working on a debt projection right now that will give taxpayers the understanding that, okay, here's what the city's debt payment and debt capacity, both. It's the capacity, it's also the payments that we're making. And it gives people an idea of, based on what portion of their city tax is going to pay down debt and what part is going to operations. Generally for people, it's kind of a reminder. Only 42% of the city's budget is covered by local property taxes. So we receive 60-some percent from other revenue sources to pay for our operations. But there is a portion of that is associated with debt. And so we're working on a projection on that right now. As far as the net effect of the tax rate, which most people are probably asking, overall, the total net tax rate is projected to increase 1% next year. That's accounting for all the taxing jurisdictions, the city, the county, the school district, Mid-State Technical College, and the state.
Okay. But the city portion of that, was it fairly flat? Or?
Actually, it's about a 3% increase.
Okay.
So on a per thousand basis, it's about 37 cents per thousand of an increase next year. So essentially, it's $12.34 per thousand is what people pay for city operations of the overall tax rate.
Okay. Now this goes to the council. What if they decide, well, that's too much, and we're going to...
They'd have to cut operations most likely by 3% or forego some of the borrowing. The challenge is we've already borrowed some of that. So when you borrow for like the first $2.5 million for the Aquatic Center, we borrowed for that in the spring. That gets reflected in 2018's budget, not in 2017's budget. So the borrowing thing gets sticky if they want to backpedal on that, but we did projections for them when they said, we think we can borrow the $5 million that they chose to borrow. They felt comfortable at that time about that, but it would be like foregoing public works construction projects. Next year we're going to be doing all of High Street on the west side of town over here, as well as some other west side projects, Van Buren. We were thinking about trying to accomplish Chase Street, but we couldn't fit it into our budget for next year. So there's a fair amount of construction activity planned. Actually, for a change, we haven't done a tremendous amount on the west side. Most of it's been, on the east side. We try to balance every year what are the highest needs, and there's been some of the east side projects have been higher need compared to this year.
So this coming next year's the west side's needs are going to be addressed.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay, we got to take a quick break and then be back with more. We're visiting with Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink here on the Morning Magazine. 715-424-2600 is the number to call if you have a question for the mayor this morning. Otherwise, we'll take a quick break and be back with more here on the Morning Magazine.
Good morning and welcome back to the Morning Magazine, presented by Comfort Air Heating, Cooling, Plumbing. It's time for part 2. Once again, here's Carl Hilke.
Thank you, Jerry, and welcome back, everybody, to today's show on AM 1320 and WFHR.com. Our monthly visit with Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink, talking about a lot of different things. Well, let's talk about something you gave a heads up during your report to the council last night. It's about an upcoming meeting with the prospective developer for the Triangle project, and so that falls into one of my issues I wanted to talk with you about. What's the latest on the Triangle project?
Sure. So next Monday, we're inviting prospective tenants, be it residential tenants or commercial retail tenants, to a discussion to kind of hear about the project, share their interest and kind of their desires for the various space needs they might have. So if residents are wishing to live downtown, we want to have a conversation with those folks about, what are the dynamics? Is it 2-bedroom? Is it 3-bedroom? Or is it 1-bedroom? We're at the stage yet we're still kind of refining the concept, and we want to hear from prospective tenants their interest and what their appetite might be, as well as to kind of test some of the rent variables that might exist. That if there's certain amenities, that changes the cost of construction and the price on a monthly basis. If we're talking the apartments of the residential side of the equation. So we want to have a discussion with prospective tenants downtown. So Monday evening from 4:30 to 6:30 at Karen's Wines and Steins, we'll be discussing having the developer present, and they can talk about various projects around the state and the variety of amenities that their developments have offered.
Okay, and so this is for anybody who's interested in this project, especially if you want to be a tenant.
That's right, and there is still an unfinished business that's going to take some time to work out that we've been working on, and that's the commercial or the retail space on the lower level. Our commercial retail market, as we've talked, is overbuilt. I mean, it's evidenced in the amount of space that the Rapids Mall offers our community, and the many strip mall or commercial developments around the city. That this will add more to the market, and there's already a question of how much the market can support. So we're trying to discuss and figure out what are the ideal tenants. There's a question around an indoor market, kind of a public market dynamic that we're exploring, where you could bring in food vendors as well as various producers of canned goods to, there's some people that do salsas, and there's kind of a public market model that exists in communities, and the cannery in downtown Green Bay is one that I've been to that is a really awesome public market. It's kind of a boutique grocer, I would call it too. So if folks are, if we've got 50 units, residential units in the building, there'll be demand for, a very select type of food and other goods in the building. So we're trying to explore this market dynamic that may be in the building, so it could bring some of the farmers market vendors that typically operate, just in the summertime. If it's the Mung family that sells egg rolls and rangoons, they don't have a retail outlet, so this could be an opportunity for them to get a kind of a small kiosk in the market setting, perhaps in the building.
So I'm sure Gorman is looking at this as part of their development of the plan that they will present eventually.
Exactly. Yeah. So this is part of the due diligence that they want to explore in the market. What are people's appetite for certain types of things in the building? Things from balcony to might there be a partnership to be had between the prospective YMCA development downtown, where instead of building in a small fitness center, can we include memberships to the YMCA for the project, for tenants in the project? Of course, somebody's paying for the membership, but there may be an ability to forego the expense by building in the fitness center, for example.
How big of a building are we looking at, or a structure?
That's based on demand. So if we just do market rate, we've talked about 50 units and then 45 being market and 5 to 10 maybe being mixed income, and that's where you get federal and state subsidies to afford, the developers afforded then the ability to build a more higher quality construction. But we're looking at about a 20,000 square foot footprint, maybe larger based on the amount of retail space, and maybe that's just the retail space is 20,000. But there will be underground parking in the development. We've got, it's in a census tract that the federal government has deemed new markets, and that new markets could pay for the underground parking. So we've been working on a variety of levels on how this thing will get financed. It's a fairly complex project because the market doesn't afford, these units are about $140,000 per residential unit to construct.
Okay.
So there's quite a bit of subsidy that'll come into play federally or through the state or even through a TIF downtown, where the tax, builder, the developer, will pay taxes and then get those rebated to afford some of the construction or offset their debt obligations.
How many stories are we looking at?
Three to four.
Three to four.
We haven't settled on that item yet.
Now, has Gorman been involved with any similar type projects in our region?
Wausau, they did a project up in Wausau in their downtown. They've looked at projects in Stevens Point, but they haven't done any projects there. The unique thing about kind of us outstate communities like Wisconsin Rapids is that these developers typically don't play there. However, there are federal and state resources that are available that are oftentimes untapped. And so Gorman has started to look in other markets that are not the rock star stellar markets like Madison. They did a huge project called Union Corners in Madison on East Washington. 4 to 5 story building, mixed use on the mixed use, and then retail on the lower level, where they may have a small grocer and bike shop to whatever it might be in the lower level. And so there's a lot of good examples of quality developments that they were able to accomplish. But this is a different market. There isn't mixed use development happening around the city, so this would be the first of its kind.
Right. And then you got this, and you have what's going to be happening with the Boys and Girls Club and the Y. So
right.
How is that? What's the status of that?
Well, the Finance and Property Committee, which the council took up their report last night, the YMCA Boys and Girls Club approached the city for support for the project, and there was a couple of asks that they came forward to the city about. One was there's a small piece of property that's between the Centralia Center and the existing Yonkers building that the city owns, and the city really doesn't have a use for it. It's parking lot right now, and the city doesn't need it. So the Finance and Property Committee and the council last night gave me the authority to sign off on the ability for them to rezone that parcel. We haven't contributed it or conveyed the property to them at this stage. That's going to be part of bigger negotiations, and that was the other big component. They asked for cash grant from the city, and they also asked for the ability to apply for and receive various grants from different agencies, state and federal resources that could go to support the project. The council decided to postpone discussions around cash grant, which they felt it's highly unlikely that a straight cash grant would go to the project because essentially the whole property will become tax exempt. So sometimes cities will give the tax increment that's in the TIF district as a grant in exchange or in lieu of some other receiving something in exchange. So they did postpone as well, or will explore the various grant opportunities that might be available. Now, given the variety of other projects that are happening within the city, there may be other projects that would be better, suited or may, in a competitive nature, be better fit for those various programs, whether it's the Aquatic Center or even street reconstruction projects. So we're assessing the various grant opportunities and loan opportunities that might be available to the project, but not wanting to jeopardize the various projects that are happening throughout the city.
You got this thing put on, and you already had a whole bunch on your plate.
Right.
So how is this affecting all of that?
Well, it's one more thing on the plate for sure. I mean, it's a bit overwhelming, I think, for city staff and I and the city council just sometimes to keep all of these things straight because they're all at various processes, steps in terms of various degrees of schedule, that they're various stages, I should say, and I think that's a bit difficult to kind of understand. In the same time, there's multiple capital campaigns going on, right? The YMCA Boys and Girls Club is fundraising for $6.5 million for their project. The city is raising between $5 and $7 million for the Aquatic Center, and then you have your general operating capital campaigns like the United Way, is doing their annual campaign. Then you've got organizations that need to fundraise just for their own operations annually. So there's a tremendous amount of capital solicitation happening, and I think donors are rightfully so scrutinizing and analyzing the various projects. We hope that we believe that all the projects can and should be successful, and we hope that there isn't a dynamic that one doesn't happen because of another, and I don't believe that to be the case, but there's a risk to that for sure.
And well, there's also, goes to what Rick Bacoka talked to you at the council about REGI, the Regional Economic Growth Initiative.
Yep.
This is where the communication has to happen among all the entities to coordinate these things and prioritize them. You can only do so, especially when it comes to building in this climate, you can only do so much during certain times of the year.
Right.
So is there going to have to be like some big grand meeting?
Possibly. I've had discussions with folks that have been involved with capital campaigns, the Centralia Center, for example, spoken with former mayors to get their perspectives on the various projects. There's also the limitation that of the capital that is in our community. And
that's it.
A lot of the wealth has, as has been reported, a number of years ago, much of that wealth is transferred, from generationally, right? And some of those folks have left the community and they're not here anymore. So I think, but it's incumbent upon all of us to really stress why these projects are necessary and will benefit the community ultimately, why they'll improve our competitiveness and attractiveness when we're talking about prospective businesses or prospective employees that are being recruited to this town. Ultimately, I think there is space for them. But yeah, I think there may be some level of coordination. I've had discussions with leaders of the various projects to say, we're not here to tell you have to wait, and that's not my position, and I don't think it's any other project's position to tell one of us that we should postpone our project simply because, they may not be able to raise the money. I think they all, at some level, maybe the projects have to be resized or just change in scope to what our community can afford.
Okay, and that takes time. Yeah, but of course, then there's the flip side of all of this. Some communities would be going, I wish we had your problem.
Yeah, right, exactly.
A community that's laying dead and dormant and people are just leaving would be, saying hallelujah to have the problems that we have right now.
That's right. And there's a lot of research just in the last 2 weeks shared about Madison's resounding economic recovery, right? It's amazing. But small towns like Wisconsin Rapids and even places around urban Milwaukee are lagging the state's recovery. And I believe it's in large part to the fact that these communities haven't been able to reinvest in themselves. They haven't been able to become those attractive places where when somebody's got a college degree and they're looking for job opportunities, where do they go? They go to the exciting places. They're not going to go to a small town that is very,
it's dead and boring.
Passe or, yeah, exactly. And so I think, I believed, and I believe my tenure in office has been around, well, we can't allow some of the passive, let's just, not worry about those types of investments to happen. I think we need to continue to make our place just as exciting as places around the state that may be having more success, like the Fox Valley.
And then we have the outside dynamic where you have things like Sand Valley, and you're going to have business people coming. And like Rick pointed out about the third visit, they start making trips around to see about the area. And if they're entrepreneurial, and many of them are, they look at riverbank opportunity.
Right.
They may see things other people didn't. Look what happened with Lake Nepco.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Some developers saw an opportunity there no one else saw. That's apparently.
Right. It's just millions of dollars in investment that is quiet generally. It doesn't happen overnight, so it's not very dramatic. But yeah, you take a drive over Lake Nepco or drive down to Sand Valley or some of these other projects. It's amazing how over time they've come to be.
Okay, and all of that will fit into that, which leads into today, Business After Hours, Heart of Wisconsin Chamber of Commerce joining forces with the Marshfield Chamber and Wood County to celebrate the River Block building, inviting the public to. Your thoughts on that? You got people downtown. You got people the parking problems, but some people are going, "Hey, this is nice to have people downtown again."
Yeah, I think we're getting to the point where we've got a new normal downtown again, where there were a tremendous amount of parking issues, both and it just takes some time to work out and to understand what the parking demand was ultimately going to pan out to be, and I think it's certainly for the good. I mean, you ask some of the business owners downtown, from the coffee shop to others. They're, jumping up and down to have new demand. And from my standpoint, the river block is occupied. It's not been, it's not vacant. It's not been torn down. I think, to have it occupied is a great thing for the downtown and for the community. You've got nearly 200 people that are working downtown every day, new bodies working downtown every day. So it's really a great thing all around and fits really well within the city's development plans to strengthen and to reinvest and reinvent the downtown waterfront district.
Are we going to have to think of new parking, or are we looking at future parking ramps in downtown.
I don't think so. I don't think so. I believe that there should have been some consideration to that, but it's kind of worked itself out, I think.
Okay. We got to take our final break and then be back with more with Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink. Welcome back to the final segment of today's Morning Magazine, and we've been visiting with Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink, talking about all of the different, so many things to talk about. Well, that's great. Revision and wastewater charges. What does that mean for both residential and industrial users?
Well, we've got back up a little bit. I think we did a rate study to analyze our wastewater rates. The city not only, as many of our listeners know, we not only treat residential and light industrial waste, we also treat the waste from cranberry processors, and that cranberry processing waste is a bit difficult to treat because of its composition, and we don't have a lot of complementary waste streams coming to the wastewater plant that sometimes will, the biology and the chemistry will naturally work itself out. So we did a rate study to ensure that our residential ratepayers were not subsidizing the treatment of waste of other users, and that was completed last year. And we were still short based on the operational cost to treat wastewater. So the rate study does account, and then generally there's a cost of living adjustment or a cost of doing business adjustment annually. So wastewater rates do increase 1% at the turn of the calendar year for residential users, and then we had some other adjustments based on chemical costs and things for the industrial users. So really, it was around equity and kind of fairness of the treatment of wastewater. So those rates will be adjusted on January 1st.
And the idea is the industrial users aren't being subsidized by the residential ones.
That's correct.
Okay. There was a change in the wording of the council meeting date, and there was some trepidation, I noticed, but there was only one vote against it. But basically, what did the council do in terms of that? I guess it adds some flexibility if there's questions of having a quorum or if there's some type of an emergency situation. Is that...
Yeah, there was actually a change in state law
that
was petitioned by a fellow mayor that allows for me or flexibility for more of a modernization too. The previous ordinance and the previous state law was that if I called a special meeting, I can do so at any time, but I had to give a written notice to them at their abode, their house. That's what the ordinance says, at least 6 hours before the meeting. So the state law change allowed us to notify members in a manner that it could be text message, it could be a phone call, it could be an email, instead of having to be delivered, posted on their door.
This is the 21st century.
You're right. So the state law changed, and we wanted to change that. But the other piece to that was there was a piece related to the council president calling a meeting. Our meetings are the third Tuesday of every month at 6 p.m., our full city council meetings. But there are times where a holiday, and it hasn't happened in my time, but a holiday or other reasons why we may want to move our meeting. There's also some members of the council believed that if they were unable to make a meeting, or if there was maybe two or more that couldn't make it, but we still had a quorum, that maybe we should consider moving our meeting. And all of our meetings are noticed. Generally, they're noticed 4 or 5 days, 6 days in advance. But some members of the city council said, no, if people put it on their calendar, city council meetings are always at 6 p.m. on the third Tuesday. They should always be on the third Tuesday at 6 p.m. So I don't know. I believe in some flexibility. Our lives are fairly dynamic, and it's not that the world doesn't revolve around our city council meetings, contrary to what some people believe. The world won't come to an end in the city if we move a meeting back a week because of a various purpose. So.
Well, I can think of like when you have an election that falls on the same date of a council meeting, you might want to consider changing it.
It's common that we've moved our committee meetings off of the first Tuesday, which is generally election day, in the spring and the fall. So that's a good example of when we've moved them before.
What are some of the big? You touched on it a little bit, but what are some of the big projects? The ones that people notice and affects their lives, and in terms of streets or street repair. I know East Grand Avenue. Let's start with the downtown.
Sure.
What's on the schedule for the next year in terms of what we will be happening
You won't see anything happen on East Grand until 2019, but 2018 will be the working through the final design of that corridor. So that takes it from the Grand Avenue Bridge all the way to 8th Street. It's going to be an enormous project. I think when you compare it to other city projects in terms of length and scope and probably disruption to the city, but that's in 2019. There will not be a roundabout by the library. I know I continue to get calls from people saying, "Oh, what about the roundabout?" It's not happening. It's going to be a four-way stop at Lincoln and the in East Grand. As far as in Jackson Street is kind of the area there too. As far as other big projects, talked about High Street.
Right.
And the High Street from near kind of 34 and 13 to the north. That's where that project. There was an intersection upgrade there, removing some of the pavement and things last year. But from 7th Avenue to 10th Avenue next year will be High Street, as well as 12th to 17th Avenue. So that's going to happen. That's a big project for the city. And we've got, we talked about the Centralia Center parking lot. That'll be one we'll notice. We're doing a lot of concrete pavement patching. That concrete pavement stuff, particularly on the Expressway and 8th Street, we pulled off of 8th Street for all intents and purposes and reallocated those resources throughout the city. And our pavement patching will happen at the intersection of High and Wilson Street. We did High and 1334, which is near Verso and Consolidated Water Power, and improve that intersection. We're also going to be doing joint sealing on West Grand Avenue out here, and that will keep the concrete, preserve the life of the concrete, in other words. So that's going to be a big project. That's mostly just a sealing project on West Grand. And State Highway 54 will also occur next year.
Okay, when we're doing this, you mentioned like 8th Street, and the Expressway is fairly old. Mm-hmm. What are we looking at? Of course, this goes into the state transportation budget.
Exactly, and we don't have it on our radar because it would be a state project. Mm-hmm. We haven't heard a schedule on 8th Street or on the Expressway, but that's why we keep maintaining the joints, so that way if you can maintain the joints, it'll preserve the integrity of the overall system. And there's just general maintenance. We do our catch basin maintenance, which are the storm sewer catch basin. You see around the city, you'll see squares of asphalt where we've adjusted the manhole covers and things over time, snow plows and just natural degradation improve or impact the quality of those. So we've improved, or we've updated those. You won't see any other street reconstruction other than Chase. Chase is a full reconstruct of all the utilities underground, so it's a labor intensive process.
And one of the things with when you do utilities underground, you find stuff that should have been fixed maybe decades ago. You find out how old the infrastructure of the city is.
High Street is going to be one of those, because it's a west side project. You run into bad soils in certain areas. Fortunately, when we did the splash pad on the west side, the soil, we didn't run into too much issue with the soil, but there are projects that have blown up in cost because we ran into unforeseen circumstances and we have to bring in more fill, or it takes more time. And so, you have to, those are the unknowns until you open up a street that hasn't been touched in 60 or 100 years.
And of course, for those folks that are affected by, will there be informational meetings with the neighbors?
Right. We generally do open houses before the project begins. When the public hearing happens, when we set the rates for the cost for special assessments, there's an opportunity and they all get notified of that meeting as well as the anticipated cost. We're also going to continue to do our sidewalk maintenance program next year. We started down near the hospital, down to East Grand, and it's a pretty big area. We had more work to do than we had financial resources this year. So next year we reallocated money to finish that project and continue to do sidewalk maintenance on various neighborhoods, and that's going to continue throughout the city as we go forward.
Okay. Anything else before I let you go?
I don't believe so, Carl. We covered it all this morning, I think, pretty well. We do have a call maybe flashing in here.
No, that's probably going for over the back fence, and we're kind of running out of time.
All right.
So
they know how to reach me at City Hall if they've got questions.
Yes. And again, if you are interested in the Triangle Project, October 23rd, 4:30 to 6:30 p.m., the prospective developer, Gorman, is hosting the meeting along with city officials. Kieran's Wines and Steins. Do folks need to RSVP?
We do suggest that they RSVP, but certainly we're not going to, folks can attend if they did an RSVP.
Okay. Well, I know you're very busy, so I'll let you get back to work. I thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you, Carl.
And we also thank Jesse from Wisconsin Rapids Community Media for being here as we wrap up this edition of the Morning Magazine on AM 1320 and WFHR.com.